Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Iranians are on the streets, protesting high costs and inflation.
President Trump posting, if Iran kills peaceful protesters, quote, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go.
Fresh from forcing leadership change in Venezuela, could the U.S. use the same playbook in Iran? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, as you're watching today's show, leave us a comment telling us what you think about the protests in Iran and what should happen next. If you're listening on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really helps the show. On Thursday, there were reports of an internet blackout in Iran. Online monitoring group NetBlocks called it a digital censorship measure targeting protests across the country. My guest has been following the twists and turns of the protests since they began. I spoke to her just before the online blackout Thursday morning.
I'm Narges Bajoghli. I am an anthropologist, and I also head the Middle East Studies program at Johns Hopkins.
Well, Narges, welcome back to The Take. It's good to have you. As you know, thousands of people are on the streets in cities across Iran for a second week of protests over the economy, protests in which dozens of people have reportedly been killed so far. And though they've spread nationwide, what's notable about these demonstrations is where they started, in the bazaars, with merchants closing up shops and taking to the streets. Paint a picture for us, if you could, of Tehran's Grand Bazaar, which has been at the heart of some of these protests, and help us understand why it's significant that these demonstrations started in and around there.
Yeah, so the demonstration started in the cell phone bazaar, which is outside of the Grand Bazaar, but yet nonetheless connected to sort of the wider economic arteries in Iran. The significance of it, one, is symbolic. Much of what led to the 1979 revolution in Iran that gave us the current sort of government that we have now there started also with prolonged strikes in the bazaar. So having something like that happening in this instant is a symbolic importance for the movements for change across the rest of the country. And then the fact that the stores and the bazaars have kept their doors shut over these past almost 2 weeks now is also important because protests, for example, there have been lots of uprisings in Iran over the past 40 some odd years. And the more recent one being in 2022 with the Women Life Freedom, the protesters kept asking the bazaars to shut down, and they didn't for prolonged periods of time. So this is one of the reasons that it remains so significant is because of that.
Interesting. Okay, so I hear that difference. So talk to me about why. What is it about the economy that has made people go out into the streets, shopkeepers and others?
First of all, there's the currency crash.
The country's currency, the rial, has plunged to an all-time low of 1.4 million per dollar. Inflation has soared beyond 42%.
So Iran, it's really a double-edged sword right now is what we're looking at. It's both economic mismanagement for years and years, but it's really also the pressures of U.S. economic sanctions, and especially the maximum pressure sanctions of the past decade, which began when Trump was first in office in his first administration. So the reason it began in the bazaars was because the merchants, it doesn't make any economic sense for them to be selling at the prices that they are selling now with the currency crashing the way that it does. So essentially they're saying we cannot go on with business as usual. And the state is attempting to make what they're calling like economic surgeries and coming up with ways of trying to do different kinds of economic policies. But the reality is that unless the sanctions are in some way negotiated, this economic crisis is going to continue. That's a catch-22 for the Iranian state because the sanctions, you cannot negotiate them unless you're willing to negotiate on your foreign policy. And it seems like on the Trump administration's end, they're not interested in that. They keep asking for surrender from the Iranians, and they keep saying that they're not interested in further negotiation. So this is where the state is really caught, and the people are saying to them, we're tired of being stuck in this situation. Figure something out or get out of the way.
You have friends and family in Iran. What are they telling you about the differences they're seeing, and what are they feeling like?
Yeah, I mean, some are hopeful. Many are extremely frustrated. Many see that there is no easy way out of this. Um, a lot have sort of gotten to a point where there's like, if we don't try this, we don't know what else can happen. Some are worried because President Trump saying that if folks are killed, they're locked and loaded to confront Iran. Others are hopeful by that and thinking that that is going to actually help the state, the Islamic Republic, restrain from being repressive like it usually is in uprising. So there really is a mix, which is why it is very difficult to put your pulse on what is happening right now. I think it's really, a few things are really important. One is that as of right now, as I said before, there isn't a unifying mission. So a lot of people are pouring out all of their frustrations, and they have a lot of very real frustrations with the state of the country, the state of the economy, the cost of living crisis is, I mean, this is something we're seeing globally, but in a place like Iran with years and years of sanctions, imagine the frustrations that we're seeing globally with inflation, and then compound that with economic strangulation. So this is sort of the situation that folks are faced with, along with the fact that there is an ongoing escalation of rhetoric between Iran, Israel, and the United States. And folks don't want continued war. They don't want continued confrontation. And so this is all in the mix. On the other hand, you have folks who don't like the current situation. They want changes, but they are also very afraid of internal unrest, potential civil war, Iran turning into a Syria. All of this is in the mix right now. And then you have right now the only visible sort of, and I hesitate to even call it real opposition figure, but the son of the former monarch of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who is based out of the United States. He's sort of elevated in the media as being the person who can lead this post-transition. A lot of people in Iran are not behind that. So this is a really complex situation right now.
It sounds like there are so many hands involved
Yeah.
in this. So I want to parse that apart. We know
Yeah.
that these protests are primarily about economic grievances, inflation, cost of living, the squeeze that people are feeling. But then there are also these political forces that you're describing, both inside and outside the country, who appear to be trying to capitalize on this moment in their own ways. So let's start with inside of the country in domestic politics. Can you walk us through how this is playing out?
Yeah. So domestic politics, you have the current president of the country who comes from the more moderate slash reformist side of the political spectrum. He brought back the former head of the central bank in an attempt to say, I'm going to bring technocrats back into power and we're going to bring people who are experts on these issues. But then you have across the political spectrum, I mean, I think this is one thing that folks really don't always understand about Iran. Iran is not like many post-revolutionary states. It never developed a one-party system. It's not like what's said at the top sort of follows through like you have in a Cuban model or Venezuelan model or Chinese model. Iran is a highly factionalized state. And so you have people who are more on the hardline side who are really attempting to weaken the folks who are in power today. So you have also folks on that conservative end of the political spectrum domestically in some ways supporting these protests as a way to undermine those in power. So you have a lot of that going on. So this is also another part that makes this very, very complex is the political disagreements that are happening on an internal level within the country.
Wow.
You also then have social movements in the country. Iran has, you have labor movements, and then you have young people and just normal citizens who are very frustrated and don't see a future, a viable future in front for them. And that frustration is pouring out. So this is part of what you have. And then you also have the military establishment in the country, which is a really important one to take into consideration because you have two strong military establishments in Iran. You have the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, and then you have the formal military. To date, as we're speaking, we haven't seen any kind of defections from any of those spaces. So One fear, and yes, there have been over a dozen so far reported killed, but in context of other Iranian uprisings, that's not a lot of repression. Iran's security forces repress very, very heavily, unfortunately. And so we're not yet at the stage where we can talk about them really coming up against a crisis quite yet, although the situation is extremely fluid. And so you have the political and security apparatus in there as well.
It explains why we've seen headlines coming from Iran that seem to say that the government is trying to listen to people. You called it economic surgery a little earlier, but there is this plan to subsidize, give people the equivalent to what would be about $7 to help them sort of meet the needs of this crisis. Do you think that that will help?
It actually angered people more because it's such a small amount of money. Iran has a lot of wealth. It has a lot of resources. Iranians are used to a higher standard of living. It's been about a decade where that standard of living has really been impacted. So to come and tell Iranians who have a sense of themselves, who have had a certain kind of lifestyle and have been used to that and have a sense of where they should be in comparison to other economies in the world, this is why the state is really caught in this catch-22. Any kind of decisions that it is attempting to make, it is coming up against a lot of anger. And part of the reason is they can't actually do much to fix this economic situation because it is so intimately tied to the political situation, and especially in regards to foreign policy.
We'll have more with Narges after the break. So Narges, we talked about inside Iran. Let's go outside of Iran. There is obviously a strong connection between Iran's domestic crisis and its foreign policy situation. So I want to go straight to what's been dominating headlines in Western media, at least as of late, and that is something that's seemingly not related at all: Venezuela. And the U.S. abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And hearing some of the statements that U.S. officials have made since that abduction, there seems to be a feeling that the U.S. is saying, Iran, you're next. So on Sunday, Trump commented on the protests happening in Iran, quote, "If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States." U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham was even more explicit during an interview on Fox News wearing a Make Iran Great Again hat.
President Trump has not turned his back on the people of Iran. So I pray and hope that 2026 will be the year that we make Iran great again.
What do you make of the U.S. moves in Venezuela and what that could mean for Iran? Do you agree with this linking of those two things?
Well, Iran and Venezuela themselves as countries have been very, very closely aligned as allies. It's definitely a sign that those in political power in Iran are taken very seriously. But there's also a way in which this has caused conversation in the opposition for Iran as well, because in the Venezuelan case, they did a surgical strike in essence to kidnap Maduro, and then they have not put in the opposition. They actually, in many ways, utilized the opposition, but kept the political system intact, at least as of now. In the Iranian case, there's increased conversation about, from the opposition side, of will we get played like that as well or not by the United States? There's increased conversation about, well, maybe we just need to make a certain kind of deal with the United States in order to stay in power, because they obviously don't seem to be for regime change kinds of wars like has happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, which are Iran's neighbors. So I think the operation in Venezuela in many ways it is a continuation of U.S. imperialism, but it is a very different kind of it than the ones that we have been used to over the past 20 years in the Middle East region, at least. But I think one key difference is that the United States always sees Latin America as sort of its quote unquote backyard. And so it operates in particular ways. For me, in this moment, I find it extremely difficult to believe that they would be okay with leaving the remnants of the Islamic Republic in the same way that they did with the Chavez sort of post-revolutionary state in Venezuela, because you have then Iran, in many ways, is what Israel would like to consider its backyard. It's a very different security dynamic than what you have with the United States and Latin America. So this is what I think. There are certain parallels, but there are very big differences.
Hmm. Does it worry you at all as someone who studies this? You're teaching on Middle East studies and you're following history. What is your own take on that?
Yeah, I mean, all of everything that is happening right now is worrying. The United States is no longer abiding by any even remnant of international law at this stage. It is in many ways acting like a rogue superpower. When you have situations like this, and I think the other big thing is that they don't seem to have a really clear plan about how they're going to do anything that they're saying they're going to do in Venezuela. There's lots of different kinds of pressures that are happening across the Middle East. You have lots of very, in Syria, for example, in Yemen, there are lots of hot spots, and we're not even talking about Gaza and Israel-Palestine either. There's so many hot spots right now across the region. It is an extremely worrying time. And I think that is what folks have certain kinds of desires and hopes for the future, but the reality is we are also living in a moment in which there seems to be a complete acceptance by those in power across the globe, but especially in the most powerful countries right now, that might makes right and to hell with everything else. And I think that is something extremely worrying.
Okay, well, I'm going to up the ante on worrying comments and statements from U.S. officials and former U.S. officials. So let me just read out this post from Mike Pompeo for those who are not on X, formerly known as Twitter. It starts with, the Iranian regime is in trouble. Bringing in mercenaries is its last best hope. And then it ends with, Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them. And that's in reference to Israel's National Intelligence Agency. What do you make of this?
Well, it became very obvious to a lot of Iranians during the war in June that Mossad has infiltrated inside Iran very deeply. So this was an attempt, I think Pompeo's post is an attempt to say that that continues and Mossad continues to be very active inside of Iran. I think from his point of view, he's trying to put that out there as saying that, hey, protesters, don't worry. There are secret hands in the background making sure that this is going to go in the direction that you all want, which is regime change. So Pompeo's message, which dovetails upon a lot of other Israeli officials, and again, happening within this broader context of the past 2.5 years in the Middle East, is that Israel is now the hegemon of the region. And either you get on board or you will reap the consequences of that if you do not. In essence, that is sort of what Pompeo and others are saying. This also gives a great tool to the state to say that, and what is happening is being instigated by Mossad, and these are not the desires from the population. And that is then where the repression continues to increase. Now, the reality is that these protests do come from very real concerns that Iranians have. Then there's the other reality that you also have a lot of folks who are trying to instigate and sort of up the ante on the state. And these are agent provocateurs of one way or another. There will come a point where this will clash into each other. Part of what they're trying to do is they want Iran to get to a crisis point. And they're trying to push it to that point. And that's sort of where we are. Now, the danger of that, Iran is a massive country. I mean, geography-wise and population-wise, it's 90 million people. If you have a form of state or regime collapse or a form of civil war, like in the Syrian sense, come up in Iran, that is going to spill across. It will create refugee flows, but it will also create the movements of fighters in and out of all of these different spaces. So part of what they are doing is sort of saying, if you don't make changes, we are guaranteeing continued chaos. And that's sort of what we're seeing.
Gosh. Well, finally, Narges, Iranians have had to cope with so much over this last year. Not only this economic instability, the sanctions, the threats and the agitation from foreign world leaders. but also the emotional and the physical repercussions of what's now known as the 12-day war between Iran and Israel in June, after Israel launched airstrikes on Iranian military and nuclear sites. And that's the last time you were on The Take. It was in the midst of that war. From your vantage point now, what is the lasting impact of all of these crises, and how have they left your friends and your family members in Iran thinking about what they want out of their government?
That's an excellent question. And I think Iranian society for 150 years has been in one way or another demanding and protesting against its various governments that have been in positions in Iran over this past century and a half. And part of what they have been demanding are two things. One is sovereignty vis-a-vis outside powers, and the second is sovereignty and independence vis-a-vis the state that may be in power within Iran. These struggles will continue. They've been there in Iranian history, and they will continue. And these kinds of uprisings, it's a part of Iran's history to be demanding and wanting to get to a space of either a certain form of republicanism or a certain form of a state apparatus that they feel like they are being represented in. At the current stage, there are two main things in Iran's history. One is demands of the state that they have ruling over them, and the other is demands of sovereignty and independence from foreign powers. That second part, especially given the way that the Trump administration is acting, especially given their language vis-a-vis Venezuela when it comes to owning their oil. This second part, even if we do see a change in the system in Iran, the more that you have talk on a global scale of owning countries' resources, they are opening a Pandora's box. They are trying to act like a 19th century sort of naked emperor going around and colonizing in a new way. And it might work in the short term. The overwhelming force that they have may work in the short term. But if you're looking at the history of Iran, if you're looking at the history of Venezuela, all of these different types of spaces, whether that resistance comes under the umbrella of the Islamic Republic or under the umbrella of whatever might come next, the fact that folks do not want to be under not only an autocratic state internally, but also being told what to do from the outside, that will breed certain kinds of resentments moving forward. So the entire situation that we are in right now is really the opening of that Pandora's box.
Oh. Narges, I am worried at the opening of this box, but I appreciate you for walking us through so clearly and concisely. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.